Hey man.
Hey, hello, Eric. Can you hear me?
Hi Danny. Yeah.
Okay.
How's everything over there?
Oh, all right. Yeah. I'm taking leave from work today, so all good. Get to rest a bit.
Did you guys get vaccinated?
Yeah. I had my vaccination, both shots. Some of my colleagues are not vaccinated yet. Well, at the moment, the population, the country is about 40% vaccinated.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah. You guys?
No, not yet. Haven't have enough for everyone. We're still locked
Okay.
down. So that's the
Oh, yeah.
reason we're a cap. Thank you for answering my invitation, man.
No problem. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah. Danny, can you introduce yourself for the coaches in Taiwan?
Okay. My name is Danny. I'm the head of strength conditioning at Singapore Sport Institute. So recently I've just completed my PhD studies, and my topic of research was on isometric strength training, for sports performance.
Yeah. So why isometric? Why? I mean, so for all those topics, why do you choose isometric training?
It first started. I first explored isometric training when I trained our judo team. So in judo bouts, you see a fair bit of isometric contraction when they're struggling and holding on. So I included isometric training for them, and it turned out pretty good. They all got stronger, and it actually helped with their performance. And so when I look at the literature, very little is done on the effects of isometric training for sports performance specifically. We've seen effects of isometric training on strength adaptation, but most of them are like single joint exercises, and you can't really see much application to sports performance. So that was why I decided that I can explore it.
Yeah. So, like, what do you think, like, if it's for athletes, if they train isometric strength training, so what do you think they can get from it?
Okay, one of the advantages of isometric strength training is the ability to improve the force production at a certain joint angle, certain joint position, more than dynamic strength training. So, for example, if I'm using isometric strength training for squats at the parallel position, thigh parallel position,
Yeah.
specifically at that point, I will be increasing my strength more if I use the isometric strength training at that position, more than if I just do dynamic strength training. So by including isometric training into the overall program, you can specifically target the most biomechanically disadvantaged position. Yeah. So if you can increase the force production at that position, you're probably going to be able to move better. Yeah.
Okay. Can you tell us about how do you like program this into your training?
Okay. Currently, what I do most of the time is I will replace half the volume of heavy resistance with isometric version of the exercise. So, for example, I have 4 sets of heavyweight squats. Then I will replace 2 sets with the isometric method. And most of the time, I will get the person, the athlete to perform the squat at either the bottom face or at 90-degree angle. So the bottom face is where concentric phase is initiated, and then 90-degree knee angle is around where the sticking region is. So these are where you really want the force production to be high. Yeah.
Okay.
Another way, another method I do is using isometric contraction as a potentiating activity. So I would use it as a contrast training. So pairing isometric, for example, isometric squat, and followed by some counter movement jump or squat jump. Yeah.
So you talk about like you replace like half the volume from heavy lifting to iso, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the heavy lifting, is it like maximal strength, or like you started with like hypertrophy?
Okay. At this point of time, I usually use it as during the max strength phase. So I haven't really used maximal isometric training during the hypertrophy phase. For hypertrophy phase, what I do is so I'll get them to complete the usual heavy resistance exercise. So for a squat again, for example, and then on the very last set, I'll get them to maintain isometric contraction. So using the whole method isometric contraction at the bottom face for a set duration of time. Like for example, if they're working at 60%, 1 RM, I'll probably get them to hold the position for 15 to 20 seconds. And then if it's 70, about 5 to 10. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the very last repetition.
Yeah. So does it mean like you use like force plate with the isometric training?
No, not at the moment, because it's not very efficient in that sense, because we have so many athletes, and if I get everyone to be on the force plate for each set, then it takes too long for them to complete the yeah. So yeah, because isometric, if I'm going maximum isometric contraction, then it really depends on the athletes to really exert with maximal effort. So we just have to trust them to do it. But most of them are self-motivated, so we don't really have to worry too much about it. Yeah.
Okay. You said like maximal isometric training. Like how long should they be holding the bar, or how long should they be against the bar?
So usually I would do about get them to hold for 3 to 5 seconds per repetition, and each set is between 3 to 5 repetition, and the contraction has to be rapid contraction. I don't usually get them to do a ramp up method. So because it's quite similar to how we perform heavy resistance exercise. You want the athlete to exert rapid maximally so that you get the best out of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, can you tell everybody about the physiological adaptation for the isometric training?
Okay. The adaptation is pretty similar to the heavy resistance training. So if you work at long muscle length, so for example, if you do a leg extension and then you bend your knee to about 90 degree, that would induce a longer muscle length as compared to if you only bend it by about 30 degrees. So what happens if you execute the isometric training at a longer muscle length, you'll be able to increase your strength throughout a greater range of movement. But the site of hypertrophy is also specific to where you execute the isometric strength training. So if you execute it at long muscle length, the hypertrophy taking place will be different at a different region as compared to if you contract it at a short muscle length. And one of the advantage of isometric training is its effect on the tendon. So most of the study have shown that isometric training has a greater effect on tendon stiffness as compared to dynamic mode of training. So when it comes to rate of force development, you really want to have a tendon that's stiff enough for the muscle to be able to what's the word to use? Transfer the force over, efficiently. Yeah.
Okay. So you talk about tendon. Like, what if there's pain in their, like, let's say knee or like their heel? Does isometric training works for them?
Okay. Yeah, there are a number of studies that showed that isometric contraction can actually reduce the sensation of pain in the tendon. And in the recent podcast, Pacey Performance podcast, Dr. Keith Barr was mentioning about his new study on how performing isometric strength training he mentioned 30 seconds contraction, and that would help to really improve the condition of the tendon. Yeah. So based on Dr. Barr's recommendation, people with tendon problem should perform isometric contraction with a long contraction duration, about 30 seconds. Yeah.
Okay. Earlier our conversation, you mentioned like you would use isometric training for like potentiate, right?
Mm-hmm.
So does that mean it's like post-activation potentiation, you use like isometric first, then do some plyo? And
yeah.
Can you like talk a little bit more detail about this? Like, would you use this in like during the in-season or like pre-season? When do you use it, and how do you decide you're gonna use this method?
Okay, so if we're talking about team sport, I would use it during the in-season because one of the reasons is there are two reasons. One is isometric training. It poses lower risk of injury as compared to heavy resistance training. So during in-season, you really want to reduce the rate of injury. So using isometric training, you can maintain the strength. You can also improve the strength. And it's a good potentiating method as well. Then the second reason is also there are studies showing that isometric training actually has a lower metabolic cost as compared to dynamic training. So maybe that might help with reducing the risk of overtraining during the in-season period. Yeah, and like I mentioned earlier, what I usually do with if I do a contrast training between iso and plyo, I would have shorter contraction. So maybe contract maximally 1 repetition of 5 seconds or 3 repetitions of 2 to 3 seconds, followed by about 30 to 60 seconds of rest before I get them to do a plyometric exercise.
Good. So mainly it's in season, but can I do like maximal isometric only in season? Like you just said that it's gonna cost less metabolically, right? So, and less injury. So does that mean I can use like only maximal isometric like contraction? Maybe not plyo, but only like max contraction for iso for in-season training.
Yeah, so it really depends on what is your objective. What is your objective for the in-season training? So if your objective is to maintain the strength or even to sort of hopefully increase the strength as well, then yeah, you should be able to use mainly just isometric alone. One of the things that I'm going to look into is because we know that it has lower metabolic cost, but in terms of neuro fatigue, so neuromuscular fatigue, in comparison to heavy resistance exercise, we don't really have much evidence on that. So this is something that I will be looking into.
Okay.
Yeah. So after that, I should be able to give a better recommendation.
Okay. Thanks, man. Thanks. Do you work on like, I know there's a lot of people doing like bilateral stuff, isometric. Yeah, but do you do like unilateral stuff for isometric?
Yes. So if you look at one of my past posts, you'll see that I got one of my cyclists to perform a split squat, maximal isometric split squat. Yeah. So it really depends on the objective of the training. We know that bilateral exercises would improve bilateral performance, and then unilateral, so not an issue. You can perform isometric training, however, with whatever exercises you want, but you just have to be clear of what your objective is. Yeah.
Okay. So can I use like isometric training for like warm up for, let's say I do a isometric mid-thigh pull, then I do maybe like high pull, or like I do a overcoming isometric first at the position of the thigh was parallel to the ground. Then I do heavy squat. Do you recommend that these kind of stuff, or you would be like this for like warm up, not really for doing others? Do you recommend this?
Yeah, that should not be a problem as well. Including isometric contraction during warm up helps to sort of increase the activation of the muscle, and subsequently you should be able to perform the exercise more effectively. And again, one of my previous posts, I sort of come up with the term task-specific PNF stretch. So what I did was I did an overhead squat. So I start off my first repetition. I only got to about 120-degree knee angle, and then hold for a few seconds before I get up. And then the next repetition, I actually went slightly lower, and I did that for a few reps. So after each repetition, I was able to go down to a lower depth. So so if you include that into your warm up, that actually might help you to improve your range of movement, and allows you to get to a greater depth or greater range of movement during your main sets of exercises.
This was really good. I never heard of this before.
It was a trial and error. Yeah. trial and error with my athletes, and wow, it's effective, and yeah, I started using it.
So how heavy would you do on what you just said, like improving the range of motion? How heavy would you do the squat?
Well, it doesn't have to be really heavy. Because the main idea is to allow the muscle to get used to that, the muscle and tendon to get used to that range of movement. So even if it's just an empty bar for squats, I think that would work. Yeah.
Okay. I follow your work since the mastermind of Pacey Performance, and you guys was talking about isometric and other stuff. Right. So you mainly program the isometric work for in-season, right?
Not necessary. During off-season, yeah. I do that for off-season as well.
So can you tell everyone about how do you program this maybe during the off-season, and how do you program it in season, like whole years, the periodization? How would you program this? Okay.
So all right, for me, I don't really deal with team sports. So my athletes, we don't really have this in-season, off-season. So the way I periodize it is mostly block periodization for them. So it will be a block of general strength, block of max strength, and power, and so on. So usually I won't have a continuous block of training that includes maximal isometric. So I will have it on and off. So a 6-week block with isometric, a 6-week block without. And the reason for that is at this point of time, I'm not too sure if a continuous inclusion would actually be effective, because we know that if we do a certain form of training all the time, there will be diminishing return. So what I usually do is I'll put it on and off, so that there's sort of like some new stimulus that will help to break the plateau of adaptation. So in terms of if my objective is maximal strength, like what I mentioned earlier, I would half the volume. Usually I will half the volume of the dynamic training and replace it with the isometric training. And that isometric training would be at either the range, the joint position whereby concentric force is initiated, or at the sticking region of the exercise. So, and then when it comes to the power phase, I would usually use isometric training as a form of potentiating stimulus and pair it with a plyometric exercise. Yeah. So at the moment, that's how I include it. And then if the objective is hypertrophy, I mentioned earlier, what I usually get my athletes to do is hold the isometric contraction during the last repetition of the exercise for a certain period of 10 to 20 seconds usually. Yeah. So then that would increase the time under tension.
Yeah. So that's about all for today's question, man. Thank you. Can you tell everyone about your future, and is there if there's any coaches who want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
Okay. So at the moment, what you can expect from me in the future, probably sometime later in the year or next year, is I'm working on a study that I mentioned earlier, compared the neuromuscular fatiguing effect between isometric training and heavy resistance training. And also I'm currently looking at the effects of a long-term inclusion of isometric training. So we including isometric training for half a year straight, so 24 weeks straight versus periodic inclusion. So we want to see which one has a better effect on strength adaptation. And at the moment, we know that there are two types of isometric contraction, the hold versus the push method. So I have the intention to look at what the adaptation to these two types of training would be. Yeah. So this is the near future. Okay. And then if anyone have any better ideas on what I can work on, then we can talk about it. Yeah.
No, I think that's great, man. So if there's like coaches want to reach out to you, ask for like more about isometric training, where can they contact you?
Yeah, just send me a message, drop me a message on Instagram, drop me a message on Twitter. Yeah.
Just like
Danny Lum 82 for both. Yeah.
Thanks, man. Appreciate that. Are you holding the cell phone for all this time?
Yeah, I'm resting it actually. Yeah.
I'm sorry, man. Sorry.
No problem. It's isometric training, man.
Thanks. The content was like really good. So maybe next week I'm gonna do the broadcast to translate all this into Chinese. Okay.
Okay.
And I'm gonna put this on YouTube.
Okay. Thanks.
It really helps.
Okay. You're right. Thanks a lot. Thanks.
Yeah, maybe when the like neuromuscular fatigue, the paper come up, we'll do this again. Okay.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
No problem. See you. Have a good day.
See you. Thanks. You too.
Bye.
So that's all for today.